What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the FPL Showcase, where I get an FPL manager on from either inside or outside of the FPL world to discuss a few different topics. And in this one, we're doing psychology, and I've got Ross on, aka FPL Raptor. How you doing?
Yep, doing really well, thanks, Andy. Absolute honour to come on. I've been watching your videos for about 3 years now, well before I actually entered the Twitter community. So yeah, really excited to get talking psychology with you today.
Yeah, me too. I think it's going to be quite interesting. I've never done anything like this on this channel, to be honest. I feel like sometimes I think about these things, but not necessarily with the proper names necessarily. So we're going to talk about all that. And by the way, Az sent me a message on Instagram the other day because I put FPL Raptor, aka Ross, as if like you're not really ever called Ross. So I got it the wrong way around. So it's a good job I did it there. So correct me if I'm wrong. You're a PhD student and lecturer in sports psychology. Is that right?
Yep, that's spot on. So I do a bit of lecturing alongside my PhD as part of like my scholarship. So I get to teach and I also get to learn at the same time.
And maybe even more exciting, Ross has written a book called The Mind Game FPL. Now, I will leave a link in the description below if you want to go and check this out. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is from this, but obviously we're not going to talk about absolutely everything because there's quite a lot of stuff in there. Just for any like shadow of a doubt, I'm not getting paid for this. Ross isn't getting paid. I bought the book myself. The link below will not be an affiliate link, but obviously it's so good. It's got so much good feedback from the FPL community. I wanted to promote it while we're talking about it. So it'll be an Amazon link below, but I'm sure it's in other good bookstores as well.
Yep, it's on the publisher's website as well. But if you go onto Amazon, you'll find all the details.
Good stuff. So a lot of the elements we're talking about will be taken from this, but obviously there's a lot more to it. So if you want to check it out, link in the description below. All right, let's get into it, right? So bias is something that I think we see a lot of people talking about, recency bias and stuff like this. And again, there's a lot of these discussed in the book. So we're just going to talk about a few of them. And I think one of the main things, I guess, which is interesting is not just that we know it's a thing, but also how we can stop it, right? Because it's one thing knowing it's there, and then how can you change it, or what can you do to change how you are as an FPL manager, how you pick players, pick your team, right? So let's talk about the bias blind spot. This is definitely something that affects me. So again, correct me if I'm wrong. So this is where you know you might be biased, aka you're a Man United fan, I'm a Man United fan. I know that I might be biased towards Man United, but I may say that I'm not. Is that right? Have I got it?
Yeah. Essentially, cognitive biases suggest that as humans, we're not perfect. And prior to the research in the early 80s, everyone just assumed that humans were these rational beings that made perfect decisions. And we realized that's not the case. We are quite irrational sometimes, and we make a lot of subjective decisions. The bias blind spot essentially says that we're able to spot biases in other people. So I can say, oh, I can see in Andy's video, he's very biased towards Man United, but I'm not biased towards Man United at all. So we're able to spot the biases in other people very easily, but it's very difficult to spot when we're making a mistake or making a suboptimal decision in our own decision making. And it's quite an ironic and funny way to introduce cognitive biases, because throughout we're going to say, try and avoid doing these things, but you might not be able to do that, which is quite a cool way to start with it. But yeah.
Yeah, I noticed this like in a few FPL managers. Like, I won't name names, but you'll see like their team will get promoted and they'll say they're not biased, but you see what they're saying. They'd never say it about another team, and like it's just because it's their team. They're obviously, and that's fine, right? You get excited by your own players and stuff like that. But I mean, is there a way to kind of recognize it and stop that, like in your own, from your own point of view?
I think that the first thing to explain is that because we're not perfect human beings and we will make mistakes, not to fear making mistakes, and realize that that's part of the learning process. So if you're new to psychology and learning about biases, you'll probably be able to spot them quite easily after the fact, and you'll realize you've made the mistake. But as you say, trying to stop that in its tracks is a lot more difficult. I suppose the easiest way to do it is to attempt to analyze the decision post hoc. So after you've made the decision, as you do and Black Box do, and that's why they're so popular, is why did I make that decision? So yes, I captained Salah and it might have ended up not being the correct decision, but what was the reason for captaining Salah? Was it because I was influenced by the community? Is it because there was a really good underlying statistic? And analyzing after the fact will allow you to realize if you've made a mistake or fallen victim to a bias. And the second one is just improving your understanding of psychology. If I'm going to say in this video that a mistake that you want to avoid is falling victim to anchoring bias, but you don't know what anchoring bias means, it's going to be very difficult to stop yourself from making that mistake. So to try and understand the semantics of it, try and understand the vocabulary, and once you know what the bias is, you can then start to spot it in yourself, and then hopefully stop making those mistakes.
Yeah, so anchoring bias, from what I've got written down, is that we will basically favour the first piece of content that we receive, right? So if someone hasn't looked at their FPL team, or they've not made a decision on a transfer, and they come and watch one of my videos first before they maybe go and read a thread or listen to a podcast, they might favour what I've said rather than what they hear second of all or third of all, or whatever it might be. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. And it's why you see a lot of content creators try and get their threads out on a Monday, or release their pods on a Monday, because they're the ones that that's the first thing they listen to. And at the end of the week, you often see people, oh, I listened to this pod early last week, or watched one of Andy's videos early last week. And without meaning to, we tie our metaphorical anchor to that idea. And it links well with plan continuation bias, which is the idea that you just continue with a course of action because that was what you said you was going to do at the start of the week. And it happened to me last season with my game week 26 bench boost. I forced myself to play my wildcard in game week 25 because that was the plan that I had at the start. And I tied my metaphorical anchor to that plan, and I wasn't listening to new information. I wasn't adapting and thinking, is there an alternative that I could do? And yeah, as a result, fell victim to that bias.
Yeah, but I think it's also important to kind of know that this is a thing that could happen, but also that it's not necessarily a mistake also to stick with what you know, but it's also to be, I guess, open-minded, right? So if I decide, I've already seen a lot of people, right? Game week 7, that's when they're going to wildcard, right? They want to wildcard early. They've spotted the fixture turn already, and they've kind of made that decision. So it's going to be difficult to stop them from doing that, or I guess, guiding them a different way. So I guess it's just being about open-minded, right? Being, available to take new information in, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason we form these plans when we're going to play a chip or when we're going to transfer a player in is because they're probably good plans. And we've probably thought a lot about it and put in a lot of research. So just because it was your original course of action doesn't mean it's wrong, but you just have to be willing to adapt and willing to be dynamic, because this game changes day by day, week by week. And if you lock yourself into certain players, or you lock yourself into a frame of mind and you forget all the incoming information and you don't listen to what other managers and other statistics tell you, then yeah, you're unfortunately probably making a suboptimal decision.
Yeah, I think the kind of the two others that I got written down are, there might you might have a different point of view which you can give us afterwards, which is, which I guess biases are probably worst affect FPL managers essentially. I think confirmation bias is pretty rife. Like, people will go out, if you want a certain player, people will go out and find the reason to have that player, if that makes sense. So the way I do it is I'll look at a bunch of stats and I'll see which player, I'll try and do this anyway. I'm sure I don't do this all the time, but I'll look at a set of stats for maybe the whole of last season, and I'll see that this player was top for expected goals, whatever it might be. This player was second, this player was third. How can I fit those players in because they're at the top? Whereas I think some people will decide they need a player, so what stats can they go and find to confirm that that's the player, right? Do you think that's one of the... I don't want to say worse, because I don't want to make these things all sound really negative, but I feel like that's one we see a lot in the community.
Yeah, I mean, spot on with saying that we don't want to say they're the worst or they're a mistake, because again, as humans, we're going to make these mistakes, and I suppose they're not mistakes as long as you learn to implement them in your decision making. But with confirmation bias, it can be active or it can sort of be implicit. So if you're actively searching on Twitter, which we discussed with Simon March on one of the podcasts, that he actually types in players' names and looks for threads to try and help him realize that, yeah, that was the right decision to make. But it can also be implicit. You can just be scrolling. Say you want to captain Jamie Vardy this week. Keep scrolling through Twitter, and then you see a thread with bold letters that says Jamie Vardy as captain. And you go, oh, okay, I'm going to read this thread. And that's confirmation bias, because you've ignored all the other tweets, you've ignored all those other videos, and you're looking for that one thread which confirms your prior belief and finds some stat which suggests that Jamie Vardy is the perfect captain. And it's not just in digesting content, but we see it in sample sizes, which I know you've discussed in your videos before. We need to realize, if you extend it from 6 games to 8 games, how does that affect the statistics? Does that change your decision? If you change it from 8 to 4 game weeks, does that change your decision? And not cherry pick sample, which I see people do. They'll go on to Scout, Hub, Fix, and they'll change the sample size a game at a time until it fits their agenda. And then they'll post that on Twitter and they say, listen, in the last 9 game weeks, Jamie Vardy's top for expected goals. So try not to cherry pick data, try and take on all of the information. If there's a thread which says that Jamie Vardy isn't the best captaincy option, read it. Try and see why these managers have come to that decision, because it might be that you've missed out a key piece of information.
Yeah, and it's important to, and it's okay to read that and disagree with it as well, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously, like you said, it's not worth looking at Jamie Vardy's the best captaincy because of this thread. Ideally, you want a thread that says here's the captaincy options and here's why, and then you can make the decision. But I definitely agree with sample sizes. I've actually recorded a video today which will be out after this one, where I kind of talked about that a little bit more. But I definitely see that. Like right now for me, I'm looking over all of last season, so I'm not really drilling down to last 4 game weeks, the second half of the season, because at least then, whenever I look at one player with a stat and another one, it's all over the same period of time. Now, obviously, players get injured. Some players don't play the same minutes, and you've got to apply context to anything that you do. But yeah, I see that all the time. Like, well, in the last 8 game weeks, this team... But then I think, well, you haven't looked at the fixtures for all those teams. Did they play harder fixtures? Did they play easier fixtures? And even if you're not talking about the team that you are looking at, what about all the other teams in that same period? Did they have players injured? Were they fit? So there's all this stuff. I think confirmation bias is one of the ones, we see the most. I guess you just got to be a bit more open to what you're looking at, and even if you use last 8, right, you should probably use that for all the players you look at, right? You should use the same data.
Yeah, spot on. And there's no right answer to this. The analytics guys will discuss it to death on Twitter about what is the correct sample size, and you have to have a certain amount to develop trends. But at the very least, you should try to keep it as consistent as possible, because if you start cherry picking and changing the sample size, then you're not really finding out much at all. So yeah, be open-minded and try and be consistent in the sort of data that you're looking at and the sample size that you choose.
Yeah, for sure. And before we get onto some other stuff, I've got belief bias written down here, and this is definitely something that I fall victim to, essentially, for want of a better word. So we will decide if someone says something. We'll decide how valid it is based on how close it is to what I already believe. Essentially, is that right?
Yeah, it's a combination of, number one, is it close to what you already believe? But in particular, is the conclusion really convincing? And we'll see this in a lot of videos. Someone will present stats or in a podcast, and at the end, there'll be a really convincing conclusion. Therefore, Mo Salah is essential.
Which he is.
That conclude? Yeah, of course he is. But is he essential? But with a conclusion, you need to see, does it sort of fit the prior argument, or does it fit the stats that someone's just presented? So what I would suggest to try and avoid this is, number one, don't skip to the conclusion of a thread, article, or video
I do that
without reading the text.
It's threads, especially.
Especially because we don't have all the time in the world to read all of these threads. So we want to see, was it a good conclusion? And if so, I might read the thread then. But by doing that, we're seeing the conclusion first, and that's probably biasing the way we make our decisions. And like you say, confirmation bias as well. If you skip to the conclusion of a thread and it completely disagrees with your prior belief, say you want to captain Mo Salah and the thread ends with, and that's why you should captain Bruno, you probably won't read that thread because you're like, oh, that's nonsense, I don't want to captain him. So I definitely suggest not skipping to the conclusion of anything and reading first. And the second thing is, try to watch the entire video or read the entire thread, but before reading the conclusion, try and form your own conclusion. Based on the XG stats that Andy's just presented me in this video, who do I think is the best differential, or who do I think is the best premium defender? And if you can do that, you can then see sometimes the person presenting the content might have a hidden agenda, or they might have a prior preference themselves. So it's good to try and critically assess your decision making and make your own decisions. I think is key.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Like, I'll often see the comment section, and I think, well, I've talked about that in the video. You just didn't. You skipped to the bit where you wanted to see, so you haven't heard me. And I get that, you know, like you said, not everyone's got the time every day or every week to watch every single piece of content out there, so it is difficult. But yeah, listen to it. I do try and do that. I actually think from a content creator point of view, it's difficult because people don't want you to sit on the fence. So they want you to give an opinion about which player you think is the best, from whether it's a comparison of 2 players, whether it's 3, 4, the whole 4.5 million defender spectrum, whatever it might be. But at the same time, I'm conscious not to tell people what to do, essentially. Like, so I think it's very difficult for content creators to do that, because if I just list them all, here's some pros, here's some cons, and at the end I don't say who I'm going for, then it's like, well, how did that help me? You're just sat on the fence. So there is like a balancing act for content creators and also the person that's watching. So I guess you got to be careful with that, right? You don't want to just turn on a video and say 4.5 million defenders, get this one, and that's it, right? You want to try and provide some info.
Yeah, spot on. You need to find that balance. And like you say, if you write a thread and don't give any opinion on it and there's no conclusion, then no one's going to want to read your future threads and no one's going to want to watch your future videos. So And also, if you don't discuss throughout the video what your opinion is, and you just arrive at your conclusion with your opinion, people will be like, well, where's that come from? So you've sort of got to be slightly biased throughout these videos, podcast threads, because that sort of helps to explain your decision making. So I don't think it's the fault of the content creators. I think it's on us as consumers of content. As we're digesting content, think critically, make your own decisions, and realize that the person creating the content might have a preference already. And as such, it might be slightly biased.
Yeah, I do try to be self-aware by that, but like especially when it comes to Man United in previous seasons, I'll always say if I think they're a good pick or I think I'm picking them because they're a Man United player. Just like if someone says to me, you know, would you captain this defender? I tell you now, my answer for the next 38 weeks is going to be no. I'm never going to want to captain a defender, but that's just how I play. So I'll always try and back it up with there could be reasons to do it for this. This is why I'm not doing it. And then you make your own decision from that. So I'm very biased towards not captaining defenders, but for what I feel is a good reason. But I will then try and tell, I don't know, I will try and give a point of view about why you could consider it. And then hopefully people make their, you know, own decisions from that, basically. So I feel like I'm quite aware, but I'm sure if you watched all my videos, you'd probably say I'm very biased towards lots of things, like, because you're looking at it from a different, different point of view.
It comes back to the biased blind spot, though. It's going to be very easy to me to say, Andy, you're being biased there, but then I won't realize it in myself. But I think what you do well is the caveats, like you say, I've made this decision, but I recognize that I might be biased here. If you say that, then people can't complain if they follow your decision and it's not the optimal one in that situation.
But I'm telling you, Jadon Sancho, great pick. Before we go on to a few other points, is there any other biases? I mean, there's lots in the book, right? People can go and read. But is there any others you want to talk about now that you think are particularly kind of big for the FPL community in general?
No, I think we've covered it. I think the key ones, anchoring bias and then plan continuation. I think early on in the season, just try not to get yourself locked into certain players. I know I will almost definitely have Salah and Trent, but with players like Watkins and Antonio, try not to say I'm locked into a 7.5 million forward, because what happens if in the next few weeks, Villa sell Grealish, Newcastle start strengthening their squad and Callum Wilson looks really good? Are you then going to say, well, I can't consider Callum Wilson because I'm already locked into Ollie Watkins? So yeah, just consider those two biases and try not to lock yourself into decisions when we're 2 weeks away from the start of the season.
Yeah, I think it's actually probably a good idea to either write stuff down or maybe even just record your drafts, because I think the draft we have at the start, we remember quite a bit. And the one, I think I read this actually in the book, and then the one towards the end, obviously we like because it's recent, and then we kind of forget everything we thought about in the middle. I definitely do that because I'm making videos for like 2 months or whatever. So at the start of the season, I've got at the start of pre-season, I've got opinions. Obviously closer, we got a lot more info then about player fitness, availability and stuff, and you've kind of forgotten about all those players that were in the draft at one point and then they came out, and what was the reason? It might be good reasons why you took them out, but there might be, you know, bad reasons that you've forgotten about, right?
Yeah, it's worth documenting, whether it's just screenshots or writing down. But if you write down that maybe you have DCL in all of your middle drafts, but you don't have them in the first or the start, and you come towards game week 1 and you're like, why did I take DCL out? If you've just written a little note which says, don't trust the new system under Rafa, and then you've got a few little notes there, well, then that's enough. And you can say, right, it was the correct decision for me at that time was to remove DCL. But yeah, keeping a nice little diary or little post-it notes if you've got a board in front of you or something like that is definitely worth doing. And I mean, there's a little side note, it applies to real life. If you've ever got a job interview and you get to choose the time of day in which you interview for the job, always choose early morning or late afternoon, because if you interview at about 12 p.m, so 1 p.m. time, it's likely that you'll be forgotten and the guys at the start will be remembered and the guys at the end. So yeah, if you ever want to make an impression, do it early in the morning or late in the evening.
Nice. That's a good tip. But a lot of people, looking for jobs. Okay, I'll keep that one in mind. Okay, let's talk about gut feeling, right? You hear this a lot. I'm going with my gut. There's every season, one of the key learnings for a lot of FPL managers is next season I'm going to use my gut more, right? Is this a thing? Can people use a gut feeling? Is it? I know this is a big question, right? Because it's covered quite extensively in the book, and I'm asking you to like obviously do it a bit briefer. But is gut feeling good or bad, or can it be both?
So I think the key thing with gut feeling is trying to work out what is the source of the gut feeling, because I think people just say they're doing a decision based on gut feeling, but it could be a number of things. Herd mentality and group thing. Are you being influenced by the community? And then you're thinking, well, that must be my gut feeling because it seems like a good decision. So trying to identify the source of the gut feeling is very, very important. My general advice that I come to at the back end of that chapter in the book is try and get down to a 50-50 decision if possible. Try and use stats, logic, eye test, digest content from others in the community, watch your videos, your podcasts. When you get down to that decision, if you've still got a 50-50 and after all of that research, you still don't know whether to captain Salah or Bruno, and you've got that final decision, at that point, I think using your gut feeling can be really, really successful, because there is evidence which suggests that it's sort of this culmination and combination of your past experiences, and your brain is just processing things that you can't consciously see. So, Andy, you've been like a veteran of FPL for many years. It might be that you're like, I don't think the bench boost is correct to play in game week 18, but you can't quite pinpoint why that is. It might be that based on your past experiences, you realize that there are certain circumstances which are happening at that point, which mean that it's not the correct time to play the chip, which is then basically portraying itself as gut feeling, but you don't really recognize the source of that. But in those circumstances, it might be good to trust your gut. And the big reason that I love trusting my gut feeling, I'm a big advocate of it, I should say. So I know I'm biased towards gut feeling. The big reason I love it is because it makes you feel better if the decision, if the outcome is negative. So if you decide to captain Salah and Bruno hauls, but it was your gut feeling and it was your decision, you're going to feel significantly less negative than if you did it because someone told you to. So again, if Andy's saying you should captain Bruno and you decide to follow Andy and it goes wrong, you not only resent Andy, but you resent yourself as well, because you think, oh, I should have trusted my gut. There's nothing worse than thinking my gut feeling was that and I should have trusted my gut. So that's sort of a brief look at it. Try and narrow your decisions down to 50-50 or 1 in 3 choices. And if there's no clear favorite for that decision, then's the time to trust your gut, in my opinion anyway.
Yeah, and I think not having a negative reaction to an outcome is really important, because that definitely changes how people play the game or what their next decision will be. So if you do something, maybe because I've told you to do it or someone else told you to do it on a podcast, and then you react negatively, that's not going to make you make better decisions. It's going to make you maybe make them rashly, or maybe in like a rage transfer is something we hear about quite a lot. So yeah, that is important. I think like it's one of the reasons I like planning things like captaincy and stuff in advance, is just because you've already made that decision and you're not really worried about a gut feeling, and you've already decided on that. So when it gets to the game week, you stick to it unless there's something big. And if it goes wrong, you know, it is what it is, and you don't react so negatively. But yeah, what do you think about that? I think people, I don't know, finding negatives in decisions they've made, they're making future decisions, just makes things worse, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to try and wherever possible sort of remove that emotional aspect out of our decision making, of which gut feeling does incorporate emotions, but it shouldn't ever be a rash or emotional decision. And there's a technique I discuss in the book called self-distancing, which sort of allows you to detach yourself from the current situation. Because the reason we can look back on past seasons and say that was where I made a mistake or I could have made a better decision there is because we've removed ourselves from that immediate situation. We've removed the emotion and we realize, when I've taken the emotion out of it, the logical decision was probably the opposite of what I did. So yeah, definitely, I agree with you there.
Yeah, I mean, this actually kind of ties in with what I was going to bring up next, which is when we should make FPL decisions. Like, so for me, unless you'd already decided on a transfer before the game week started, and there's a price rise or something that's about to happen, which means you want to make it early, I feel like the weekend is like a really bad time to make a decision, because you've maybe just watched a match and a player that you thought about but you didn't quite go for is just banged in 2 goals or 3 goals. And so that affects you, obviously. Or it's the opposite way. You brought someone in instead of someone else. It was a 50-50 call, like you mentioned just a minute ago. And of course, the one you didn't bring in is the one that scores 2 goals and yours blanks. And I always feel like Saturday or Sunday decisions are the worst time to do it, because you're just not thinking clearly. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, spot on. And it links to a nice bias, which I think everyone in the community loves to use now, which is outcome bias. But
yeah,
I think the closer you make your decision to the actual event, the more likely you are to use outcome bias, because the outcome's just happened. And I should say, so outcome bias is judging the effectiveness of the decision based on the outcome rather than the actual decision itself. So if you chose to captain Salah because he had the highest XG, he had looked the best during the eye test, he had the easiest fixture, and he blanks and Bruno scores 20 points. If you make the decision shortly after that event, you're going to judge it based on the outcome, which was, well, Salah was the wrong captain. I should have captained Bruno. But really, if you're judging it on the effectiveness of the decision, well, then Salah was probably the right choice. So I think if you can try and increase the gap between when the game week finishes and when you make your decision, I think that the more you increase that gap, the better you'll be able to make decisions and the more like rational you can be with them.
Yeah, I always try and not make, like, I'll make early transfers at the start of the season, like maybe Monday, Tuesday, sometimes depending on the circumstances. But I try and never do them on the weekend. My advice, and I'm definitely no expert, that's for sure. But if you've had a bad game week, I know everyone talks about it, but you've got to just shut off social media, I think, and just you have to kind of understand how like I handle it quite well. If I have a bad game week, I don't mind going on Twitter and seeing everyone posting like great scores and stuff like that. It doesn't really bother me that much because I know I have to go on a stream anyway, which is just as bad, if not worse, to kind of meet the face the music or whatever you want to say. But I feel like you have to be kind of self-aware that if you're not going to react well to seeing other people's success, you should just shut it out, right?
Yeah, it's all about self-awareness. That's the theme of the book and this video as well, is different people react to different things and fall victim to certain biases more than others. And it's known as like a survivorship bias or survivorship effect, which is the people that survive on Twitter and on social media at the end of the night are those that did well. Those that didn't do well aren't going to post their scores. Those that didn't do well aren't going to be active on social media. So if you log on or you go onto YouTube after a specific game week's just ended, you're only going to see positive scores, really, because people are very unlikely to go straight onto social media and say, I got 32 points this week, because why would you? You're probably processing that and you don't feel great. Whereas if you've got 100 points, you've probably already saved that tweet ready. You're ready to tell everyone, your mum, your nan, everyone that I got the best score this game week. So just be self-aware. And if you think you are someone that's negatively affected by the game, just log out and you'll feel a lot better for it, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm just as bad as everyone else. I'm sure if I saw a graph of I mean, I tweet too much as it is, but if I saw a graph of my tweets, it would be like this when I've done well and like maybe this when I haven't. Like there will just be less tweets, I'm sure. And I am kind of aware of that, and I do try and I try and keep it steady that I try and tweet just as much if I've had a bad week as if I've had a good one. But yeah, it's just human nature it's like gambling, right? You see all these accounts on Twitter or wherever it is giving gambling advice, but you only ever see the big wins. Someone's not posting their accumulator every week that's just not winning because it's just not interesting. They don't want to admit that they're not done well, and no one wants to see it, right? You only want to see kind of success to a certain extent. So it's the same thing. Do you think there should be like a period after a game week where you should, before you start collecting information for the new week or maybe listening to podcasts or videos? Again, I'm sure there's some self-awareness that, if I do a stream like on a Sunday, it's going to be very much reactionary. Like I've just watched the last game, I'm just on a stream, I'm maybe not thinking the same as I would in a couple of days. But do you think it's good to kind of just have a bit of a gap?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to your advice earlier about sort of writing things down and keeping track of what you're doing. There's a little section in the book. It's like a blank diary. And I just suggest if you've got a standard sort of game week where it finishes on a Sunday and it starts again on a Friday, on that Monday, before you've read any threads, before you've listened to any content, podcast videos, try and write down what you think your decision is going to be at the end of the week. So if you've got your decision that you want to bring in Robertson and Trent, you want to go double Liverpool defense, write that down. And then if at the end of the week, instead of bringing in Robertson, you've actually looking at bringing in a Chelsea midfielder, you need to track back to, well, how on earth did I go from wanting to bring in a Liverpool defender to a Chelsea midfielder? And having that little period at the start of the week is really important to process what you think based on what you've watched, what you've seen, what you think your decision will be, and then seeing how that's been influenced by other people across the week. And if you write it down, it's a lot easier than just trying to keep it in your mind. Definitely.
Yeah, I should probably do that because the amount of times like I'll do a video saying I'm thinking about this transfer, then by the time I get to Friday, it's slightly changed, and it's not. Like, I know some people think it's like me just doing it on purpose for the video, but it's not. Yeah. I think one way, and then actually when I've looked into it a bit more, my mind kind of changes a bit. I mean, do you know what I mean? When I do videos, they are what they are, right? The reaction stream is just that. I'm not there to give full opinions, and I've not looked at all the stats yet for that game week and stuff, so I'm fully aware about what kind of stream it is, and I'm sure most people are that watch. But again, I guess it's just about being self-aware, and I probably need to write stuff down as well. I definitely think it for pre-season. Like you actually mentioned a specific player earlier, which is Calvert-Lewin, which was in all my previous drafts, and now he's not featuring at all. And I wonder if I've just forgotten about all the reasons I had him in originally, like how good he was last year, the fact the fixtures are really good. And I need to kind of just, I guess, sit down again and decide, have I taken him out because I genuinely think there's reasons to do it, or have I just found a new shiny toy instead? Like, because there are reasons not to have certain players. Like, he's not back from the England outing for the Euros and stuff. Benitez is there. But yeah, I need to probably go back and think about those original decisions. Same for during a game week, right, at the start of the week versus the end. Try and be self-aware and write stuff down. Do you think you actually kind of touched on it as well for the job interview stuff? Do you think there's a best time of the day to make a decision for your FPL team, like in the morning, afternoon, evening, or does it just change per person?
Yeah, so I mean, there are books written just on time of day, so I won't go into it in too much detail, but there are essentially like two sort of schools of thought or different theories. So one is that you should try and make decisions in line with who you are as a person, which is your chronotype, which is basically, are you a morning person or an evening person? You see people chuck these phrases around all the time. Oh, I'm a night owl. I work best in the evening. And there is a questionnaire in the book to try and find out if you're a morning person or an evening person, but there's the first school of thought says, if you're a morning person, make your decisions in the morning. So if you perform cognitively optimally in the morning, do it in the morning. If you perform well in the evening, then make your decisions in the evening, which is one school of thought. And then the second is that you should completely ignore chronotype. Doesn't matter who you are as a person, you should make key decisions in the morning. And the reason for this is, as you go on throughout the day, your cognitive functioning basically keeps dropping off. Often we'll make like mistakes in the evening, we'll drop things and we'll start slurring our words, and it's because we're tired. It's called sleep pressure. So as the day goes on, we slowly lose cognitive functioning to the point where just before we go to bed, we're at our lowest point of how well we can perform cognitively. So this suggests that if you basically make a transfer at 11 p.m., you've probably not thought about all the alternatives. You've probably not thought about all of these different things. And there's a lot of research in chess which suggests that we make really risky decisions in chess in the evening because of sleep pressure and because of cognitive functioning. So what I would suggest, trying to combine the two, because there's no right answer here, is I would do your research at the time of day which suits your chronotype. So if you're a morning person, do your research in the morning. If you're an evening person, do your research in the evening, but don't confirm your decision until the morning, no matter who you are. So if you work well in the evening, do your research, do your expected assist stats, look at all of those in the evening. Don't make the decision even if there's a price change, or unless you want to catch the early price change, and then wait until the following morning, because it might be that you wake up in the morning and you go, how on earth did I think that was a good idea? And I did that a few times last year. It meant I missed a few price changes, but I processed and I thought, actually, that decision that I was thinking about making at 11 p.m. probably wasn't the correct thing to do. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think that kind of ties in a little bit with the not making decisions on the weekend, because you can be so frustrated that just even having a sleep on it the next day, like, oh, it's not that bad. Okay, maybe he wasn't the best purchase, but he's got a good few fixtures coming up. There's not a better option right now, so I don't really need to push to get rid of him. Yeah, so I definitely agree. Like at least sleep on it. I think the problem is like you've got all these. I think Saturday deadlines are much better than Friday deadlines, because Friday's like 6:30, especially for me, because I'm doing a deadline stream, which means I've got to go through the whole day thinking about my decision. Don't really want to put it through until the deadline stream, and it just becomes a bit of a nightmare. Let's just finish on the deadline itself, what we should do afterwards. So I tell you, I almost think like after the deadline, like straight away after, is almost the best time of the week, because you've got what you've got in preseason. You've got hope. No players played yet, so you haven't seen your player blank and all that stuff. I think I read something on Fantasy Football Scout. I think it was around similar things, how we check our team so much before the game week started, because we're picturing how good it can be. Like, oh, look at those fixtures, look at that captaincy. What should we be doing instead?
Yeah, and it comes down to a really, really well-known psychological bias known as the illusion of control, which is, as humans, we think we can control basically everything. We've got this illusion that we can control events that are completely out of our control. So once you submit your team and that error page comes up on the website and you can't change anything, that's it. You've got your game week score at that moment, because you're not going to affect the way that the players play on the weekend. You don't know what's going to happen. So really at that point, you shouldn't really need to check too often. You should be able to step back and realize, you know what, I can't control my team now. And it's the same in exams. I used to do it back in the day when I was doing my bachelor's and master's exams. Once you've finished writing in your exam and you put your pen down, that's the moment you get your grade. I know it then takes weeks for it to be marked, but after you've written it, that's your grade at that point. And it's the same with FPL. So what you should be doing, and I know it's a lot easier to say than to advise than to do, is you should take a step back. And what I like to do is try and go for a walk. And it's really nice with the 90-minute deadline as opposed to the 60-minute, because you've got 30 minutes between submitting your team and then getting off of social media before the team news comes in, especially if you've got like a triple up on Man City on a Friday night and the team news rolls in and all of your players are benched. That's your weekend ruined. So what I try to do is, as soon as I've submitted my team, I use that half an hour to get off of social media if possible, go for a little walk, clear my head, see my family, And it helps you to realize that, you know what, I can't control the events this weekend. And if you try and remind yourself of that as much as possible, again, with bias blind spot, but try and remember that we have this illusion of control. I think that's the best way mentally to deal with the upcoming game week.
Yeah, no, fully. I do agree. Yeah, because it's like that period of bliss, and then the first team sheet is going to possibly just ruin it, or the first game, or whatever it might be. Like I'm even like, I've got my phone here, I've got my team up, and I'm just looking at it now, and I'm just picturing like, yeah, that guy's going to score loads of points, Salah, Fernandez, etc. It just looks so good. But I probably just need to step away and just like you said, you can't control it. Once the game starts, it's completely. You can make as many good decisions as you can in a week, and they might turn out to be bad. Not a bad decision, but a bad outcome, like we discussed earlier. And you've just got to kind of step away, like you said. It is. I don't do it. I should do it, but I don't do it. Maybe I'll try a bit more. Just to put the phone away. I think, to be honest, I could probably do with doing that a bit more in life in general, not just FPL. I think we all could.
Same.
Before we we'll just quickly go through the draft in a second, but just to end on one more thing, if you had to give an FPL manager kind of one or two tips, I didn't put this in the original notes I sent you, so I'm putting you on the spot a bit, like one or two tips to improve their decision making. Like what would I know it's hard to give like a top tip when there's so much things to think about, but yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think this was the tip I actually sent to you for your 100 top managers tips when you did that video. So it's just to be dynamic and open-minded when assessing different things. And we discussed anchoring bias and plan continuation bias and primacy effect. And all of these are basically when we're too locked into our ways and we're like, I'm going to pick that player. This is when I'm hitting my wild card. This is when I'm going to make a trade. I'm going to bring in Leeds players in game weeks 4. If you lock yourself into things too early and you're not dynamic and open-minded and you don't take on new information, you're going to probably make suboptimal decisions and you're going to be stuck in your ways. And so the number one piece of advice for myself as well, I need to keep reminding myself, is to adapt to FPL. It's an ever-changing game. It changes minute by minute, week by week. And to lock yourself into certain things and not consider alternatives is probably not a very good thing to do. And then just critically assess the actual decision-making process as well as the content. We see a lot of content creators say, oh, I shouldn't have made that decision because Mane had a higher XA and the fixture was slightly easier. But as well as the content of the decision, think, well, the actual process itself, did I fall victim to any biases? Was I affected too much by Twitter? Was there a certain thread that convinced me to do something? Did I follow my gut feeling? And was that successful for me? Because some people just don't know, they're not in touch with their gut feeling. So yeah, just try and critically assess the actual process of making the decision as well as the FPL content.
I feel like I'm almost scared to make a gut feeling decision these days. Like, I don't think I do it that often. I kind of wish I could. I talk about this a lot on videos, that I almost wish I could play without knowing all the stuff that I know now, if that makes sense. Like I hate the word sometimes, but like I wish I could play like a casual. I really do, because I'm thinking about it so much. I just can't make that gut feeling. Like I've even thought about it, like for my team for game week 1. Could I just have that one spot that's just a punt? It's a differential. It's a gut feeling pick, and I just won't do it. I wish I could. But yeah, the first point I definitely agree with. You have to. Be open-minded. Essentially, I think it's good. Like I see people with rules, and I don't think rules are necessarily bad, but you have to be prepared to break them in FPL. Things change, like you said, game by game, week by week. This is pre-season, so we're going to talk about the draft, because we've done that with General and James when he came on as well. So let's just take a quick look through. Now, a lot of the drafts we're seeing are fairly similar for good reason. There's some good player picks in there. So I'm just going to pick out a couple which maybe haven't been in as many drafts, and I just want to get your opinion on them. So Greenwood, could we be seeing some Man United bias here? What's your thinking around him in the team right now? And obviously, caveats apply. We know these teams are going to change, right? So don't worry about that. But why is he in right now?
Yeah, okay. So bias blind spot, I might be being biased without realizing here, but I don't think I am. I think the fixtures are really good. I think you discussed it in your Is Bruno Essential video that a lot of people are looking at the fixtures and you can't captain Bruno in 3 and 4. And I think the fixtures are actually a lot better than perhaps people are considering. At the start of the preseason, I completely disregarded Greenwood because I had a feeling that Martial would come in on the left and Sancho would be on the right. But Martial was actually further behind in his fitness than I thought. And Cavani, Pogba, Rashford's injured. None of them have returned even to training yet. So Greenwood's the only player that's been there throughout all of pre-season. He's played a couple of games. He looks fit. He hasn't performed particularly well, but he looks very fit. And I just think he's got Ollie's trust. And it would be very strange to not pick the only player that has had a full pre-season with you. So I've got a sneaky suspicion that Greenwood could start potentially the first 2 or 3 game weeks, and I think he'll definitely start game week 1 against Leeds. And as you sort of alluded to earlier, I like to take one big risk, one big punt that is either a rotation risk or perhaps the stats don't back them up, where it's just, you know what, I'm just going to go for that player. And at the moment, the team, as you can see on the screen, is pretty template other than that. So I like the idea of taking a punt on that sort of 4th mid spot. And that could be Greenwood. It could be Diogo Jota if Firmino doesn't return from his break after the Copa America. But I like the idea, of taking a punt on an explosive player that can score goals in that spot.
So funny thing is, right, so we're recording on Friday. The video is going to go out on Saturday. I did my draft video on Thursday. Right now I'm looking at my draft here, my current one, because obviously I've been playing around a bit. I've actually got Greenwood in as well, just for the same reasons, because I too was thinking, well, Sancho's there, Rashford's there, Martial, but Martial's not really been back in first team training yet. So the chances of him going in 2 weeks' time to suddenly be ready to start a game when Mason Greenwood's basically been involved in pre-season training right from the start is very low. And I think I don't think Solskjaer yet sees him as a striker or being able to play that striker role that often. So I think he is going to play on the right. And I think Sancho's going to start on the left, because Sancho's obviously had a bit of time off, but he has been fit and available the whole time. It's just obviously he was away with England. So I think we could definitely see a Sancho left, Bruno middle, Greenwood right, and Cavani up front. As long as Cavani's ready, right? We're still waiting on that. So yeah, I like the Greenwood pick. One other is Luca Dean. So he's a player that was kind of in everyone's first drafts and has maybe slowly started to come out. I mean, I haven't checked his ownership. It's probably still quite high for the people that don't necessarily tinker as much as we do. So it's 22%. So it's not like it's low. Have you got confidence in him and Rafa Benitez?
I do actually, and he was out of my draft in a couple of those sort of middle drafts, and obviously we've got like recency bias here. I've brought him back in, and it makes me feel like I might actually keep him in for the rest of it. But I really like that 5.5 million slot. I think even I saw someone have John Stones the other day. I quite like that. I like the idea of Reece James if he looks fairly nailed. Cresswell, I think Cresswell was going massively under the radar. I know you discussed him in your premium defenders video. I just think he's top scoring defender last year. Fantastic threat from open play and from set pieces. I sort of look at him and think I could end up with Cresswell in there. Yeah. So at the moment, he's just a 5.5 million, not placeholder. He's my top choice at the moment alongside Luke Shaw, but I like that price. And worst case scenario, could downgrade him to Soufal or Dunk. I think there's a lot of good options at 5 million as well if I need to upgrade anywhere else. So I do really like Luca Dean, but I don't know if I'll end up with him definitely in game week 1.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, I haven't worked it out, but quite a few comments on that video were about the fact that not that I overlook Cresswell because I talked about him, that maybe I undervalue how good he is for 5.5. I just think so. I know Cresswell's got set pieces, which is obviously good because that helps for bonus because he's creating chances all the time. But I just think so far for 0.5 less might be worth it. But it depends if you can fit him in. If you've got a structure you like this, then obviously there's no harm in having it. All right, we'll leave the draft there because I think we've discussed loads of the other players in various videos this pre-season. But I just want to say thanks. That was great. Very interesting. Nothing like I've ever done on this channel before. And I guess it's good to confirm that I am aware of these biases and probably subject to them way too much. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Obviously you can follow Ross at FPL Raptor on Twitter, on Instagram and stuff as well, and soon to be making YouTube appearances for Fantasy Football Fix, right? The channel,
Yep, starting that gig in a couple of weeks.
There you go. So keep an eye out for that. And obviously, if you haven't already, make sure to check out the book. I will put a link in the description below. Like I said, it's not an affiliate link or anything like that. It's just going to be a direct link so you know what you're buying. But it's basically the mind game. Obviously, it's an FPL Fantasy Premier League book. So we'll leave it there. Please do give it a like if you enjoyed that. Something a little bit different. Hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. Make sure to watch all my videos because I am definitely not biased. And I'll see you again tomorrow for another one.